when Adania Shibli, who is a Palestinian writer, had been supposed to receive an award at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and they say to her, "You can't come anymore." You know, there was the German culture minister who, when a Palestinian and Israeli, whatever that means later, were given an award for a film, a documentary, won an award for documentary film in Berlin. They didn't. The culture minister said she only applauded the Israeli. She wasn't applauding the Palestinian. We were seeing that, Palestinian voices or pro-Palestinian voices were being censored in Germany, you know, so I gave this award back because I was like, I can't keep a state commendation from a government that, of course, also is the second largest exporter to the Zionist state. It didn't make sense to me.
Zukiswa is a prominent South African writer, editor, and author. Beautiful person. We spoke briefly before the interview. Besides the research that we did on her, and she's going to tell us about personal relationships with her parents, with her books, with her studies. How did she come with the brilliant titles of her novels, and where is life taking her now? And now let's dive in. Zukiswa, thank you so much for coming to our show.
Thank you very much for having me, Aziz.
We appreciate your time. If I can start from Zambia, where you were born and raised, if that's right, and then you moved to South Africa.
No, I moved to Zimbabwe.
You moved to Zimbabwe.
Zambia up until like 5, 6, then Zimbabwe, then South Africa after 1994. But I mean, came through obviously when sanctions were lifted in 1990. Yeah.
You were the only child, which in your opinion, very liberating. How was that? How was your relationship with your parents? I know your father passed away early. Was your relationship stronger with your mom?
I had a pretty decent relationship with both my parents. My dad passed away in 2003, actually, and he was born in 1939. So I think relative to a continent where the average death rate is 45 or something, he would be considered to have lived a life. But my relationship with both of them was... they're both very decent relationships. I think they shaped me. They shaped my outlook on social justice.
In what way?
Essentially on social justice, on the idea of equality, on being empathetic to other people. And a lot of it has to do obviously with my mom, because when we moved to Zimbabwe, we'd always have my cousins. They would come and stay with us, and I would go and I'd also like stay with my mom's friends and their kids. And there was very much a sense of, you know, it's not with my mom has 7, 8 siblings, and we never had a situation where I referred to my mom's sisters as my aunts. We always had mom from this city, mom from this city, mom from Avondale, mom from whatever, mom from this town. So my cousins and I all referred to our mothers as mom. And I actually don't even like the word cousin, because up until today in Shona, they still call me Sissy, like my sister, you know, and my brothers.
Mm. Yeah. From there, you moved to South Africa, let's say, and you studied at UCT.
No, I didn't.
You didn't? Where was it?
I actually studied in Hawaii.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, that other settler colony.
How did that happen? That's a massive shift.
Yeah. So when I finished A levels, I had applied to go to university in the US, and I wanted to. I applied to a few places in the US, and
why the US?
Well, I think at that time that's what everybody used to do. At that time, we all used to think the US was cool.
That means there's a lot of changes, eh?
Indeed. But at that time, we used to think that was like the ultimate and stuff. But I chose to go to Hawaii because it was the only place that I knew in the US where my parents didn't have any friends.
Okay.
So I wanted to be able to like do whatever I wanted to do as a teen, a post-teen, without any reports going back to my parents about what craziness I was getting up to.
So how was it? You finished your studies. Did you start writing for them from that time? But before that, I believe the creativity started from early age with the dark book that you read when you were like 10.
Yes. And it really is like a little warning to parents that children shouldn't read everything. And I read 1984 when I was like 10, 11, and it was traumatic because, yeah. Because then I became very petrified anytime that I saw like rats, even mice, like small little mice. They petrify me. I'm scared of them until today. So if if somebody wanted to torture me, they'd probably have to do the way Winston was tortured and just put me to face the rats and then with them jumping up to me or something.
Because there's I don't know if a myth or a claim that Africans, they don't read and they don't buy books. I think in your life or in your lifetime, you try to kind of dismantle that kind of narrative through your books. Again, I'm very happy and very interested with the titles as well, with novels and the titles. How did you find that narrative, and how did you try to escape it, if that's the right term?
Well, I always think that part of the reason that we had that narrative is because people haven't found the stories that they like, and so in writing, I try to write the type of stories I would have wanted to read, the type of stuff, and also the other thing is I generally gift books, and because I gift books, I like to be able to find stuff that I feel is relatable to each person. So when people say I don't read, I usually respond by saying, or when somebody says they don't watch movies or they don't watch whatever, I usually respond by saying, no, you haven't found something that speaks to you. And so, because that's my engagement, that's art, and that should be our engagement with it. And so I will generally recommend, I'll say to somebody, I remember saying to my cousin who was also in I Don't Read, I gifted her a book and I said, listen, I want you to read the first page, and if you don't like it, I'll take my book back. And then 40 pages later, she was, have they written something else, type of thing. And yeah, so I like doing that. My friend's brother as well, he was also like, and I don't read. And, I was like, I know the book for you. And I do that with everybody I meet.
So what spoke to you to write The Madams?
The Madams was 2006. Well, I actually wrote it in 2005, started writing in 2005, came out in 2006. And The Madams, at that time, there was a lot of like exciting energy in South Africa, the belief that, we all love each other, kumbaya, let's hold hands, etc. And I wanted to highlight that things haven't actually changed,
Since 1994.
Yes, in a lot of ways, yes, we can finally as black and brown people, we can walk on sidewalks and we can eat in the same restaurants as white folks, but the status quo hasn't really changed. And one of the marks of that is domestic workers, even for the middle class. And I did this book where I was like, okay, a black woman has a white domestic worker. And of course, it's like subverting racial role reversals. But I also wanted to play on this friendship of three women, one who, by all intents and purposes to everybody, is colored, although she considers herself black, and then an African woman, and then a white woman. So the three of them, and the reaction by the white woman then to the idea of this black woman having a white domestic worker, you see. And so I wanted to play with that and where we are as a country, as far as gender is concerned, as far as the politics of economics are concerned, Who has a trust fund? Who doesn't?
That's a good question to ask. In your opinion, what are the challenges that writers generally have, and African writers faces on a daily basis?
As is, we're in Africa, so you can't say African writers. You just say writers.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me.
But I think there is the biggest problem we have is taxation on books, particularly in South Africa. And one of the more disturbing things and it's something that we've been fighting for ages, people in the literary industry. I think as far back as 2006, 2007, when my first book came out. And I remember the then Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel. And Trevor, if you're listening to this, feel free to sue me. I remember you saying this, that they weren't going to remove taxation on books because reading is for the elites. And
so how do you explain again taxations on books?
So essentially, because books is a text, what happens then is books are then very, very much more expensive than they should be. When you think about like the West, for instance, like the global North countries, a book is probably like $20 or whatever. And you think about here, it's cheaper to buy a book than to go for a movie and popcorn. Over here, it's the inverse. Fortunately, this is not the case with all other African countries. But I think also all other African countries are invested in that idea of people don't read. People actually do read, and you mentioned it earlier. People actually do read. What they don't do is they don't always buy books.
How do you read then?
So I remember giving my cousin a copy of the Madams years back, and my cousin stayed in my grandmother's house in Soweto. And everybody in the street read that one copy, but everybody read it. So when I got there, they were like, Bazooks, I liked what you did with whatever, but none of them had bought it. So when I asked, because I was going for somewhere and I didn't have any more copies, I was going for a literary festival. So I went to her and I said to her, "Am I get that copy?" And she said, "No, I gave it to Bonge." And then Bonge said, "I gave it to this person." So it had traveled pretty much the whole street and everybody had read it.
But it's understandable that maybe many people they couldn't afford, but they wanted to read it.
Yes, absolutely. They wanted to read it. But, there's also obviously, there is always a budget for libraries. So this is probably another way that libraries can invest in that. But one of my sadnesses is that sometimes people work, not just people work maybe for libraries, people work at at the Department of Education, people work at Department of Arts and Culture. They're there because it's a job. They're not there because it's a calling. And these particular jobs are supposed to be callings, you know. You do it because you love it. I remember growing up in Zimbabwe and going to there was a bookstore that I used to go where they'd have discounted books. And there was this little old lady, these two little old ladies, and they would tell you, you know, they would say, "Oh, have you read this?"
What to buy,
and they
what
would,
to read.
exactly, and they would recommend, and they were discounted. They were next to nothing or whatever. But even in the library, when I went to the library, they'd always be able to say, "Oh, I'm so glad you enjoyed this. Let me show you what else you'd enjoy." But if you go to a library where the librarian can't even recommend a book, I remember going to Polokwane Library, and the biggest stock of books are these like cowboy books from the US.
Imagine.
Cowboy romance.
Oh. on this note, firstly, thank you for correcting the African writers. But how do you handle the Western agent who tells you your books are not African enough? It's a concern, no?
You know, what is African? You know, do Africans not breathe? Do they not love? Do they not laugh? I like the idea of looking at something. You know, a good story is a good story, and so I don't take seriously somebody who says, "Zukiswa, you're a good Black African woman writer." You know, it's either I've written a good story or I've
writer
written, any good stories should be relatable. You know, it doesn't matter where you're from. So when somebody says that, it says to me that you have decided that you want to box and ghettoize Africans, a whole continent of 55 countries, as if it's, you know, everybody's experience is similar. I mean, obviously, we do have similar experiences in certain ways, but we also have different experiences because the human experience is something that's, you know, that can be similar in different places. You know, I have conversations with my friends from Pakistan, for instance, or Palestine, or from Brazil, and part of our conversations is how, like, when we're growing up, the things that our mothers and our fathers used to do and say, like how our mothers, you couldn't backchat your mother, you know, and their extreme talent of being able to, if you mumble something, they could always hit you right on the back of your head with a slipper, you know, like, who are you talking to like that? You know, type of thing, right? and it's an experience that a lot of people are familiar with, you know. And,
maybe not this generation, but yeah.
No, but that particular generation,
yes.
You know, the people were raised. So it's my son, you know. We even talk about how, like, in certain households, there was a seat that only the father could sit, you know. I can't imagine anybody telling my son, like, you can't sit on that chair because it's daddy's seat. He would laugh my husband out of space. He'll be like, where am I supposed to sit? I bought here first, you know, type of thing. My nephews would be the same. My nieces would be the same, you know.
African literature prizes, like I think Canny, I think that's the Canny Prize.
The Cane Prize.
No, the Cane Prize. Have often sparked like debates. What is your perspective on such awards?
To be honest, I think we need as many awards as possible, but I personally don't take it that seriously, and it's not because of my judgment of the organizers. Great, thank you for giving us this award. I'm more interested in the conversation where we create our own awards. You know,
Who's we now?
we as people on this continent, and it's diasporas where we're like, okay, instead of waiting for the Royal African Society. What the hell is even the Royal African Society? But instead of waiting for something called the Royal African Society to fund an award for a literary prize in Africa, which, by the way, has not moved from £10,000 since it started in the early 2000s or 99 or whatever it is. We've got enough corporates in Africa. We've got organizations like Afrexim Bank. We've got organizations like African Development Bank. We've got organizations like our own corporates. When you think about Standard Bank, First National Bank, etc., and a lot of these Standard Bank, First National Bank, ABSA, they're in a lot of other African countries. So why isn't it that, I mean, a lot of them will fund jazz festivals, by the way. They fund music, but they don't seem to understand the impact of something like literature. Or maybe they don't want to understand. That's what I sometimes say, because a reading populace is a questioning populace. So we might start questioning why the
situation is like
we might start questioning why their CEOs earn so much money while they're tellers. That type of thing, right?
Yeah. No one wants you to ask that.
Right? Yeah. So maybe in this, they're in collusion with our governments, who I also feel that they don't really want a reading populace, because we're like, what? But if you're a man of the people, why do you need blue lights? Why are you being protected from the people?
Zukiswa, you lived in multiple African countries. I mean, I'm sure this Pan-African experience have shaped your way of understanding, your creativity, your understanding of the stories that you told me. This book is about gender. This book is about the equality. This book about Palestine and apartheid in South Africa. How would you describe that?
I think it's been very, very enriching. And I'll be honest, the continent has been immensely kind to me. And it's been immensely kind to me because they allow me to comment critically on the way things are done in the different countries. So in some ways, I joke that I'm always, everywhere I am, I'm always an outsider looking in, but I'm also very much an insider looking out. And so it would be very easy for everybody to say to me, say in Kenya or in Cote d'Ivoire or in Ghana, hey, you know what? Please shut up. You're not from here, because the only country that I actually vote in is South Africa. But I do realize that a lot of our problems are similar. And so instead of being stuck on the borders that were created by the Berlin Conference, we could work so much better together. And I do love that in one space, at least in the arts, there is the working together that you see. You see collaborations in film. You see collaborations in music. You see collaborations in literature. One of my favorite things is we have something called Book Fam Africa, where we negotiated a deal with to courier books through the continent, because one of the problems we've had is a book will be published in South Africa, but it's difficult to get in Zimbabwe, which is next door. And yet it's easier to get a book that's published in the UK. So we have then found a way around that. And I think this has also changed then the narrative where what counts as literature from Africa is not determined by the global north publishing companies, the big 4 or 5, as it were, but it's where you're having like a writer like Remy Ngamije from Namibia being first published in South Africa, and then, the people in the global north are like, oh my God, why didn't we know this guy, and then they jump so that they can publish him. It's having Jennifer Makumbi from Uganda first being published in Kenya, and then the global north, oh my God, I like that. It's having the Madams translated into Portuguese, not in Portugal, but 2 co-publishing companies, an Angolan one and a Mozambican one, because they relate to the story. And then another country in the global south, Brazil is like, oh my God, why didn't we know that? And saying, okay, we'd like to do this as well, So I like those synergies.
You highlighted the gender dynamics with one of the novels. And before we start shooting, you told me the story in relation to your son. Can you put some light on that, please?
All right. So there is the Madams, and then there's Men of the South, which is a response. But I was particularly talking about London, Cato, and Joburg, which really talks about the sexual violence towards boys and suicide rates by boys, which is not something that's often talked about. At least I haven't encountered as much in literature on this continent. I have, with Khaledo Hosseini and other, I have encountered it there, but I wanted to talk about that in a particular South African setting. And so, of course, it was difficult for me, because when I was writing it, my son was prepubescent, and I was then looking at all these men like, oh, why are you talking to my son like this? And getting worried all the time and being overly protective. But I was also talking about it in relation to him reading and as I mentioned, the books that children at a certain age shouldn't. So I didn't allow him to read that particular book, because I didn't want to give him any ideas to make him scared to whatever. I just, I wanted to protect him, because ultimately literature is art. And in the same way that we say we've got the Film and Publications Board and it says, okay, you can't watch this film and this, I also want us to be able to do that with literature and understand that it's art. So maybe some books are too grown for certain age groups.
From there, we noticed, I was when I was doing the research, that the characters in your novel comes from different backgrounds, yet their lives kind of shapes indifferently. I don't know if that makes sense, but how do these differences in their history and personalities kind of drive the story tension?
Right. Yeah, no, it's always been a thing of mine that I like character-driven narratives. I think that's actually my strength. I do less. My plot is driven by characters rather than.
And I remember you told me, even one of the stories, you started from the dark kind of.
Yes. Rather than the plot running, and usually it's because characters. The way I look at life, I look at how we as human beings, how we live our lives. Our own characters are shaped. The way we react to things is shaped by our own characters. And so I would say, there is the known unknown and there's unknown known, right? And then there's the known known and then there's unknown unknown. But I always say, like, there are certain things people know about me, but if I said, okay, can you write my eulogy right now? People who know me will write certain things, and I will be surprised by some of it. I'm like, oh, this is how you see me. But there are also certain things that I know about myself that people who know me intimately would never know. But then there are certain things that I don't know about myself that would only be triggered by an incident. So I don't know, for instance, whether I am capable of killing somebody. I've never been pushed to do it, and I hope I never do. But we don't know what drives people to get into a certain space. So and it's kind of like dog owners. When a dog buys something, it's never done that before.
But you never know when it happens.
Exactly.
I believe there's a movie. It came from a book about a professor at university who's like calm, peaceful, until his wife, in a way or another, gets into jail, and psychological and physical ability become really bad, and he become this different monster and he gets her out and run different country and all of that. So I think you never know,
No, I mean, it's even in real life, every time you see this serial killers, the neighbors are like, he was so nice. He used to help me cross the road.
Where do you bring the stories from? I mean, besides the society and sometimes interaction, how do you sit and you decide I'm gonna write about this topic, and what is the process that you take?
As I always start from I like something. I start from a difficult subject. What do I find difficult? What would I be? So, for instance, with Men of the South, my difficult issue was, okay, if I were with a partner who didn't work, would I be okay with that? And so this became my problematic whatever, and I started from there. And but that came actually when I started doing the bigger picture. The smaller picture had been where I wrote a short story based on in 2008 when there were the Afrophobic attacks, and I happened to be in Franschhoek, and somebody called me and they said, okay, we in Joburg, and they said, can we go to your place? We're being threatened because this was a South African woman who married a Zimbabwean man. I said, go to my house. And because, and so I started from that precept where I'm like, okay, what does citizenship mean? What does, if I love Cape Town, can Helen Ziller still call me an immigrant because I'm from the Eastern Cape?
She would probably do.
And why does she feel that perhaps somebody from Europe is more deserving of a remote worker's visa, and living in Cape Town, whereas perhaps I am not as welcome, despite the fact that I'm a South African citizen, and Cape Town is a South African city. So it's those things that I want to play with, and like crazy little moral things. So with London, Cape Town, with the latest Love, Marry, Kill, I obviously started from I wanted infidelity is an issue with so many people. It's a moral issue with me. So I wanted to know, okay, how would two people who have cheated on their partners, how would I get them to be likable enough to the audience? So it's usually like I'm trying to push my own literary skills, as well as like questioning that life is not black and white, sometimes there are certain complications, there are certain depths that we never think of.
I keep hearing life is not black and white, but so far, like in many situations, it's black and white, sadly.
No. I mean, when it comes to something like a genocide, there is no gray area. That there's certain very black and white issues that we can't, have like be morally ambiguous about.
Is this why you refused the German prize?
I didn't refuse it. I actually accepted it when they gave it to me in 2020. I just returned it.
Can you tell us the story? Firstly, what was it and how did it happen?
Okay, so this award, it's called the Goethe Medal, and it's a state commendation by the German government. So by South African standards, it would be something, it's a national honor, like something similar to like Order of Oliver Tambo or something, but it's usually given to a non-German for their contribution to culture. And so, I was given this award in 2020, which was immense honor, obviously, when I got it, because for what it's worth, I was the first African woman. Maybe that should have been an indication, because the award has been happening since the 50s. Since the 50s. So the fact that they couldn't find an African woman prior, maybe that should have been an indication that the more things change.
What happens,
But I got this award, and it was myself. So they usually give it to three people. It was myself and Elvira Aspeo Aika from Colombia, who is native Colombian, and there was Ian McEwan, who is a British writer. And so I was very excited. Got this award. It's very important to note that the award doesn't have a cash prize, so it's a medal. But what comes with it is you start getting a lot of like gigs and stuff based on having won that award. And so, there are those people who are like, yeah, but you didn't get any money from it, whatever. No, but then what happened is once I gave it back, what that meant is
everyone started canceling.
Yeah, they're like, yeah, no,
cutting down.
Yeah, no, we've decided our budget is not working this year, or whatever it is, right? But there were a lot of reasons why I gave it back. I mean, we already were condemning the Germans for when Adania Shibli, who is a Palestinian writer, had been supposed to receive an award at the Frankfurt Book Fair, and they say to her, you can't come anymore. There was the German culture minister who, when a Palestinian and Israeli, whatever that means later, were given an award for a film, a documentary, won an award for documentary film in Berlin, they didn't... the culture minister said she only applauded the Israeli. She wasn't applauding the Palestinian. We were seeing that, Palestinian voices or pro-Palestinian voices were being censored in Germany, and so I gave this award back because I was like, I can't keep a state commendation from a government that, of course, also is the second largest exporter to the Zionist state. It didn't make sense to me. Yeah.
I mean, when I wrote the question, I wrote, how do you view the role of literature in addressing global issues like the Palestinian? I mean, I can see the answer here. But on this note, and I'm gonna view the book that you gave me here. When did Palestine come to the map in Zukiswa's life, and how?
Oh, this is an interesting one because I remember answering this very same question in Jerusalem last year.
Oh, okay.
Actually, when I was 10, you know,
A lot of things happen when you're 10.
exactly. When I was 10 and no, actually 10, 11, I was turning 11, 10 turning 11. We had, there was a Palestinian girl who came to school in my primary school in Zimbabwe at Avondale Primary School called Dana, and her dad was press attaché for the PLO.
He was?
He was the press attaché for the PLO, and of course, I mean, my mom used to work at the Ministry of Information, and the head of the diplomatic corps in Zimbabwe at that time was Ali Halime. But because my parents were both political anyway, like even from much earlier, the ANC and ZANU, for both their failings, were always saying our struggle and the struggle of the Palestinians is, so you always grew up knowing that. But this became more prominent when I was 10 going on 11 with Dana as my friend. And Dana used to bring, because her dad was press attaché, she used to bring us stickers that said no to Zionism, I support the Palestinians, I love Palestine, etc. And my mom, because she worked for the government, was like, we can't have that on the car, but you can have it by your room. So I had it in my room. I had it on my school bag, etc. I had the stickers, and and then one time we went swimming with Dana. I think it was very early on. Firstly, I was taken aback because I didn't know, Dana, how you Palestinians come in all shades. You've got the dark Palestinians, you've got the brown, you've got the very fair,
fair.
She was like blonde, and so, growing up, I used to think that she looked white, and I used to think all white people could speak English. And Dana had been coming from Jordan, so she didn't speak English. She spoke Arabic. So I didn't understand. Like, how does a white girl not speak English? The danger of colonialism. Anyway, so Dana, we went swimming, and Dana says to me, and they asked me, it was me and Dana and Fuka, she was Zambian. She is Zambian. And then they say to me, so as we were going to walk at the public swimming pool, they said, can you swim at the deep end? And I said, yes. And of course, I couldn't swim in the deep end. I couldn't swim. But I'd seen it on TV, and I thought, how hard can it be?
Why would you say yes?
Why? Then I thought it was easy enough, right? So Dana dives in, and then Fuka dives in, and then they're like, come. And I dive in, right? And then all of a sudden, I realize, hey, this is thick, right? And then I start panicking. And Dana immediately catches on, and she runs out and she gets the lifeguard. And this is what I hear in retrospect, where it says, go, and somehow the lifeguard got it, and he came and he rescued me and pumped my stomach. And then when I'd finished the coughing and everything, they said, the lifeguard says, you need to get back into the pool, otherwise you'll never be able to swim because you'll start panicking. So I did, and then later on I could swim. But all this to say, a Palestinian girl once saved my life. So I kind of feel like every now and again I need to use my voice if it can help save a Palestinian life in any way, in any place.
Before we started, you gave me this
Yes.
book, and you told me this is your trip to Palestine, and you wrote it about it. And I believe it was before the genocide or the war, as you started in Gaza. What the genocide?
Yes.
What was this about, and how do you reflect on this now after almost a year and a bit of the genocide in Gaza?
So I was in Palestine in May for the Palestine Festival of Literature. And the way the Festival of Literature is done is you don't, it's not like you know how you have Open Book Festival here in Cape Town where you have the festival in one space. What you actually do, because of the checkpoints and because Palestinians can't travel without permission from the Zionist state, what you actually do is you have it in different cities. And so we start in Ramallah, and then you go to Jerusalem, and then you go to Hebron, etc., etc. You go to Bethlehem, you go to Haifa. And so these were my reflections, from that particular trip. And this happened, I started writing it in May. When I arrived, I started doing a few words and then, but I had notes and I had photographs and everything. But what happened is at the end of May, a very good friend of mine was also very pro-Palestine. Eusebius Makaiser died, And then I happened to be, oddly enough, in Germany, and I thought I need to finish this towards the end of June, and I started writing like, okay, and I finished it on the 30th of June, which also coincided with a month after Eusebius died. And all of a sudden, everything hit me because I realized how devastating it was, and I couldn't get out of bed. And I had to call one of my friends, and they made me laugh. And eventually I could get out of bed for the opening ceremony. All this to say, it didn't start on October 7. My personal witness account was based on the fact, on a trip that I took in May. And every South African that I've talked to who's been to Palestine will tell you that their experience, I managed to see a bit of apartheid after the sanctions were lifted in 1990. And everything that I witnessed in Palestine it's like South Africa was a dry run and Palestine is like, okay, elevated. And of course, one of the crazy things is finding that there are white South Africans, not necessarily Jewish, who are converting to Judaism and then going and becoming settlers in Palestine. And so, of course, to that, I call it apartheid nostalgia. Yeah.
One last question before we end this beautiful discussion. Now, as a South African writer, a South African author, and don't you think that there's a lot of I know that you might not like the word, but like African issues, African poverties, African things that you can focus on, and it can kind of pushes your career than focusing on like far kind of issues like Palestine?
Aziz, that's a beautiful question. But and I always say to fellow Africans that Palestine hurts all of us. And the reason Palestine hurts all of us is the weapons that we're seeing being tested on Palestinians, that have been tested on Palestinians for ages, are the same weapons that are brought into DR Congo, where, by the way, an Israeli is one of the biggest diamond, So this is fueled by that. We saw what's happening in Congo right now is the rebels in Congo are being armed by Rwanda, and Rwanda, we saw during the 30th anniversary of the genocide, the Rwandan genocide this year, we saw the Rwandan president invited Isaac Herzog, the Zionist prime minister. If that doesn't say anything about that particular relationship, I don't know what does. What's happening in Sudan right now is being funded by the little client state that a lot of people love to brag about. I'm going to Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. They are funding the rebel group in Sudan. So if we don't even begin to understand that, we don't understand how interconnected we all are. What's happening in Haiti now is one of the biggest arms traders in Haiti. Haiti doesn't make weapons, is a Zionist. The richest man there is a Zionist. What's happening, so Haiti, we look at here, we're having people who have tragically, who are South African citizens. They've got a South African passport in their back pocket, and they've been going and they're massacring people in Palestine, in Gaza. So we cannot then say this doesn't affect us. It affects all of us. Zionism affects all of us. Capitalism affects all of us, and we're the 99%, and it's very imperative that the 99% raise their voices against the 1%, the military industrial complex, because really all this is for sale of weapons. All of this is so that a few people can benefit, and you would genocide an entire people so that somebody can have money in their bank account. That's how depraved we are as a world. Or rather, that's how the global North leaders are, and some of their clients, global South leaders, politically. Yeah. So,
Zukiswa, I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. A lot of laughters, a lot of deep thinking. We really appreciate your time and appreciate your effort. With this beautiful Palestinian outfit that you're wearing as well. We're going to leave the link of Zukiswa's work in the bio. Until our next episode, goodbye.